like you to conjure up now a few images of Red Indians, American Indians. It wouldn't be surprising if wigwams, war paint and whooping young men in fearsome headdresses came to mind. After all, for most of us, Hollywood films are the nearest we get to meeting North American Indians. My next guest, though, will change all that. Mark Banks is an Ojibwe Indian and spokesman for the American Indian movement, better known as AIM. He's here in Sussex to give a number of talks about the struggle the Indian people have had just to survive as an independent people. Mark joins us now from our East Sussex studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Anna.
Now, if we were to believe the films, it would seem that most Indian tribes, the baddies, were wiped out by the goodies, people like John Wayne with their guns. But of course that's not true. Many Indian tribes still exist. But where do they live and how are they living in North America? Not on reservations any longer as separate peoples?
Well, of the 1,500,000 Indians that live in America today, about half of those people live on Indian reservations. And I'd like to dispel some of those stereotyped myths and images that people have and conceived of Indian people. Indians do not live in teepees anymore. They might do it during the summer for special ceremonial purposes, but by and large, most Indian people live in houses, just like ordinary people. And I'm speaking tonight at Sussex Hall at the White Rock Theater in Hastings from 7:30 until 10 o'clock tonight. So, and admission is free, and I'd like to invite people to come to Hastings at the White Rock Theater for this talk, because I'm going to dispel a lot of these stereotypes and myths.
Talking about the American Indian movement, when you say you're going to dispel images and myths, and one of the ways you'll talk about it is, you'll explain, is by talking about this movement. Now, give us a bit of a preview. What is the American Indian movement?
Well, the American Indian movement is an organization that initially was conceived back in 1968. And it's been in the forefront of the fight for Indian rights, for treaty rights, for land rights and mineral rights. And many times the American Indian movement has been thrust into the forefront of Indian militancy. And it's been involved at the situation at Wounded Knee back in 1973. And, many times members of the American Indian movement, and certainly the organization itself, has been characterized as being a militant organization or a terrorist organization. That's not true at all. These people have had the courage to stand up to an oppressive American government.
You say they want Indian rights. Now, what do you mean by that? Is it that they want their own land to live on? Do they want separate states, almost like separate countries inside North America?
Well, the United States of America and separate and distinct Indian nations signed 389 separate treaties. And I'm forced to tell you that the American government has broken 371 of the 389 treaties.
So you feel it's been a century of broken promises for the North American Indians?
It's been more than a century. It's lasted several hundred years.
But it's only in recent years that they've actually been trying to do something about it, that they have...
No, they've tried for a long, long time to do something about it. And every time Indian people in the past have, stepped forward to resist the encroachment on their lands and to resist assimilation into the dominant white society, then those Indian leaders have been characterized as being quarrelsome or troublesome or warlike Indians, and that's not true at all. These people are just standing up for their own people and their own rights.
But don't you think perhaps by now that it's almost too late to do anything about it? Because
absolutely not.
So much has happened, and with the lifestyle nowadays of the North American Indians, it would be very difficult to try and change things.
Absolutely not. The struggle to retain our languages, the struggle to retain our religion and our way of life is going on. I'm not saying that we're going back to hunting buffalo and living in teepees, but to retain our cultural identity, that movement is very strong.
What does it mean to you to be an American Indian?
Well, let me say that it is difficult to be an Indian in America in 1986 because the pressures are enormous for Indian people to assimilate into the dominant white society. But I know in my heart who I am. I can't be white. I cannot be English or French or Irish or Italian. I'm an American Indian. I have a language, I have a culture, I have a religion, and a way of life, and I want the right to live that way if I so choose.
Could you tell us just briefly, perhaps, a bit about the culture and the religion that makes you a North American Indian? What makes you different?
Well, I don't know so much we're different in overall concept and ideologies. We believe in a supreme being. We may not call him the same thing as other people call him. We call him the Great Spirit. But we believe in a supreme being. Indian people do have a religion. We are not pagans and heathens, as we've been called by many so-called missionaries and Christians who came to our shores hundreds of years ago. And these people came there and tried to discredit our religion, our way of life, and tried to change us and tried to make us into something we're not. And we resisted that change for hundreds of years.
And this actually happened to you because you were taken away from the reservation at the age of 6, forcibly taken away from your parents.
That's true. At the age of 6, the U.S. government came to my reservation and forcibly took me from my parents, and I was taken from my parents for 9 years. And, they tried to deculturize me.
Why did they do that? Or why is it said that they did that?
Well, I just started to say they tried to deculturize Indian children by making them into something they're not. They told children they were not to speak their language, they're not to talk about Indian religion. So it's a brainwashing sort of thing.
Can you explain in any way how the Americans feel about North American Indians? Why it is that they felt that they were superior, as you say?
Well, I think it's a real racist and arrogant attitude to feel that way, because all the Indian people really wanted was to be left alone. And, Indian people have always been known as very giving and loving and generous people, not savages and wild creatures as they've been characterized. And because we opened up our homes and our hearts and our lands to these strangers, and we helped these initial arrivees survive. We taught them how to plant crops, and we were friendly to these people. But, nobody ever bothered to ask Indian people, is it all right to come to your country and start building railroads and factories and schools and churches? These people just came by the millions, and they said they had a God-given right to do that, even if they had to kill us to do it.
Tell us a bit about how you felt when you were in that boarding school, when you were taken away from your parents. Did you, over the years, gradually begin to realize what had happened and feel a sort of identity, and that want to return to the identity of a North American Indian?
No, as a matter of fact, I felt just the opposite, because, as I say, my teachers, who were all white, did a very effective job in brainwashing me. And everything that I learned about my people was negative, that Indian people are lazy, they're stupid, they're illiterate, they're savages, and they're pagans and heathens. And I grew up believing that, because, as I say, for 9 consecutive years, that was drummed into my head. And I grew up with this negative self-image, and it took me many, many years before I realized that this was not true.
What are the reasons for coming to this country to talk about AIM and the American Indian movement? Because surely it's an issue, because I know there's still lots of battles, perhaps the wrong word, but lots of decisions going on at the moment about reservations and what land and what rights the Indians should have. Surely all the arguments should be going on in America. Why have you come to this country?
Well, I'm here to enlighten people in England about what is really going on with Native people in America. I think it's important that the United States of America realize that there are other people who care about human rights issues, human rights violations. And America has been guilty of human rights violations, believe it or not. And while they claim they are the haven for people who are seeking liberty, freedom, and justice, during those 400 or 500 years they've been in our land, they have literally slaughtered millions of Indian people. And right now there's a situation going on in the United States called the Big Mountain Issue, where nearly 10,000 people are forced to leave their ancestral homes on the Navajo and Hopi reservations.
So you're saying it's not being put right now, that situation, the situation of the violation of human rights?
Absolutely. Indian people are still battling for their lives and their very existence, and to hold on what little lands we have left, And I'm convinced that America will not rest until it's taken and stolen all the rest of the Indian land.
What is the strategy now of AIM?
The strategy of AIM is to get these people into court and to focus worldwide attention on the real, true history and actual occurrences of what is going on with Indian people in America today.
The ironic thing is, I suppose, that you have to use the American system of courts to free yourself, as you put it, from the American system.
Well, we have, and we've been very successful at it. Recently, there have been a number of court decisions rendered by the highest court in America, the U.S. Supreme Court, that have returned millions of acres of land to various Indian nations. And, of course, a lot of the white constituency have felt a sense of betrayal by their own government because the Supreme Court has ruled that these lands were taken from Indian people illegally and must be returned to these Indian tribes.
Do you find that you're getting more support from Americans at the moment? Because North American Indians have traditionally been very aware of the environment, and that's something that's perhaps coming to the fore now, trying to create a pollution-free environment. And this might have been taken up by other Americans, non-Indians, as a cause almost, and one of the reasons for supporting the human rights claim of North American Indians.
Well, Anna, in the last 15 or 20 years, there have been a number of non-Indian people and non-Indian organizations who have joined hands with Indian people because we share a common philosophy of caring for the environment. Conservationists, environmentalists, and ecologists who are very concerned about the monumental problem of worldwide pollution. And it's inherent in Indian life to be concerned about what is going on with Mother Earth. And so we are joining hands with these other people, not only in America, but around the world, who are concerned about the pollution of our lakes, our rivers, our streams, our oceans, the air we breathe, the food we drink, and the food we eat, and the water we drink.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today on Sussex Scene. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Would you like to just give the details once more of the talk that you're giving about North American Indians?
All right, yes. Well, I'm going to be at Sussex Hall at White Rock Theater in Hastings tonight, 7:30 to 10, admissions free. I'll be at Bogner Regis Center at Royal Hall Wednesday, May 28th, 7:30 to 10:30. And I'll be speaking about many topics about American Indians. And I'll be shedding some light on the true history of America during these talks.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mark Banks there telling us about the talks he's going to be giving across Sussex, talks concerning the plight of North American Indians. You're listening to Sussex Scene. It's 27.5 minutes past 11.
Hastings is hosting a very unusual but most welcome visitor this week. His name is Troniquet. He's an American Indian. Troniquet is in England to learn about the way we deal with problems of alcoholism and drug abuse. He's also bringing us a few tips as well. He deals with the problems on his reservation every day. As Jonathan Mendenhall reports, his visit is so far proving most informative.
Hastings has a solid and sordid history of drug abuse. It's a legacy which started during the early 60s, giving the town prominence only a few years ago when a local drugs dealer was brutally murdered. The drug abusers in the area are small in number but are regarded as a hardcore. Their habits constantly change to suit the market and prices. Troniquet, a social worker dealing with abuse on an Indian reservation, has warned of one drug in the States which has yet to come here. It's known as crack, and Hastings drug development worker Angela Haynes has been hearing about it.
Crack is freebase cocaine. It is in this country, but it's not really on a large scale. It's a very expensive drug. Troniquet surprisingly did say that crack is in fact cheaper than cannabis over in America. So the producers of cocaine, crack, etc. might be looking for a European market, and we may, unfortunately, be seeing more of those problems in the future.
Troniquet has been learning too from his visit. He approves of the way social services and health authorities pull together to deal with drug abusers and AIDS victims. He also likes the emphasis the English have on making an individual admit that he's addicted or got a problem. Drug workers here are impressed with the American Indian inpatient system, which removes an alcoholic from his environment and treats him to a disciplined program of rehabilitation. Troniquet explained how it works.
He lives there on the grounds for 2 weeks. He can't get off the grounds. He's restricted to that area. He gets no phone calls, but he can write letters. After the 2-week restrictions lifted, they have a family night where his family can come and visit him. So they can better understand what he's like. Because before, the person who is getting the inpatient would go directly to the house and it'd be a sick home.
AIDS is a bigger problem in the States than it is here, but we have a different way of handling HIV sufferers, and it's an approach which Angela Haynes thinks the Americans could adopt.
It appears that there is no pre-test or post-test counselling given to those people. They're just tested and given a result. Troniquet is quite interested that the British people, drug workers, HIV/AIDS workers, etc., put a lot of emphasis on pre-test, post-test counselling, supporting people once they've been through the test and prior to it. One person that did come out as HIV positive committed suicide.
During his stay, Tronakwe has been visiting various drug abuse and alcohol centres, and he's also come to town at a time when residents in one part of Hastings are protesting about a planned dropping centre for various sufferers. In spite of ignorance and prejudice on both sides of the Atlantic, he says he's optimistic.
Drugs and alcohol. Be realistic now. Going to be with us from now on. The fad of the thing. Cocaine today, morphine tomorrow, or heroin the day after, acid next week. I'm very optimistic that as long as we got good health workers like we got here in England, and you have here in England, people are going to go places.
Tronakwe, the American Indian visiting Hastings. Now, it's 8:20. We'll...
monthly journal called The Oryx. Tronakwe, if you listen to Good Morning Sussex on Monday, this exotic word might actually ring a bell with you. It's actually the name of my first guest, who's a drug and alcohol counsellor who works on a Mohawk reserve in America's central New York state. Last week, though, he left the USA and came to Hastings, where he's been visiting local drug centres and comparing notes with the staff who work there. Well, this morning, he's kindly taken some time off to come into our Brighton studio and is with me now, and he's also joined by the drug development worker for Hastings, Angela Haynes. Tronakwe and Angela, you're very welcome to the programme. If I could begin, I hope I get the pronunciation of your name right, but if I could begin, Tronakwe, by asking you, what actually prompted you to come to Hastings itself?
What prompted me was I'm working closely with Michael Seeley, who is sort of sponsoring me in this program to come over here. And we had been writing for a while between the States and England here. And I told him that I was a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor in the Mohawk Reservation there in New York. And he asked me if I would like to come over and see how it compared.
Tell me, what type of problems do you actually encounter on the Mohawk Reserve?
All the social problems that are with all surrounding towns and everything. We have our drug and alcohol problem. And today, it seemed to be the trend toward cocaine and the derivatives from cocaine, that being crack, and you can freebase it, or you can mix chemical down into a liquid and shoot it in your arm with a needle intravenously. So that's basically it. Have got away from the alcohol problem now. We used to have a thing that we judged everybody by when we did an intake in the alcohol program. Intake is when they come in and ask for help to get off a drinking problem. It used to be what we call the primary problem, but now it's mostly young people who come in asking for help, and it's all drugs now, whereas alcohol is the secondary problem.
Sad, but how different is it actually the situation in the area that you work in New York compared to what you find in Hastings then?
What I find in Hastings is, we, not so much the difference, but the approach of how we do things. The problems are basically the same, drug and alcohol, and the community denial. Denial being, in my community, no, we don't have a problem. It's the other kids. It's the other parents' problem. No, we don't have a big problem here. We have drugs or alcohol. But it's on a weekly basis that in my office where I work, that young people come in and ask for help to get off drugs. I say drugs because primarily now it's cocaine. Tomorrow can be LSD or acid. And then the week after that can be heroin.
Does the drug scene change then from week to week, month to month?
It's what they call the street thing to do. If somebody comes in with a bag of pot that's what they call dynamite weed, then they'll do that for a while. It's sort of faddish type thing. But with the cocaine now, they've not only have they become faddish, but they've become addicted to it. That's the problem.
Angela, you're a drugs development worker for Hastings. Tronakwe has been with you for over a week now. What have you actually learned, do you think?
Well, we were interested in the first instance to hear from Tronakwe how he approaches the crack cocaine problem.
We don't really see anybody with those problems at the moment, but if the media are to be proved right, eventually we might see in this country more and more cocaine, crack flooding onto the streets, and eventually people coming forward with problems. So it was interesting to listen to him about what particular problems people have with this particular drug and what approaches the services use.
What is the situation in Hastings then? What is the drug problem that you have there?
I'd say the same thing as Tronakwe says. It depends what is the drug of choice, the in-drug at that moment, what's available, market forces, etc. It's across the board, really. We've got, I think everybody in Hastings can see that we have quite a problem with alcohol, a legal drug. We also have problems with prescribed drugs, tranquilizers and such, Valium, Ativan, temazepam. Equally with illicit drugs, illegal drugs, cannabis is very prevalent. We had a few weeks ago an influx of LSD on the streets, although that seems to have dried up from what I've heard from local people who've been using the drug. For a long time we've had sort of a hardcore heroin problem, and that continues to present, people presenting with problems and such. Amphetamine is widely used as well. I think if you went looking for it, you could probably find any drug you wanted, really. It's widely available on the streets.
I've read recently in the local media a lot about ecstasy. Is this causing problems?
The drug projects, the treatment agencies, advice agencies in Hastings have not had anyone coming forward with a problem with ecstasy. I think it is available if you know where to look and if you've got the money. It's a very expensive drug. But as I say, tended to be more LSD a few weeks ago. We did have problems, people coming across experiencing problems with that particular drug.
Tronakwe, you've obviously, perhaps it's been a two-way exchange here, you've perhaps learned a lot about the drug problem here and you will be taking it home. Do you think the motives for taking drugs here are any different than they are in America?
No different. As long as there's a problem with drugs, I always say drugs are going to be here from now on. We can never get rid of them. But it's the people who do abuse are chemical. Chemical is a broad spectrum of alcohol and drugs. We will say that as long as there are them chemicals out there and people are going to abuse them to such an extent that later on that they're going to need help getting off of them, then there'll be people like Angela and her crew and all the help people in the area that they can turn to. This is the focal point.
Is it very difficult for you working in the area that you work to actually gain the confidence of the drug users?
No, simply because I am an alcoholic. I'm recovering. I'll always be an alcoholic till the day I die. I've also been in the streets where the drugs have been hardcore. I've used nearly every type of drug except I've used cocaine, yes, but I haven't did the new stuff like freebasing or anything like that. Because it's been 15 years since I've been off of all the chemicals.
Do you relate this personal experience to people that you actually meet at the reserve then?
Yes, I do. We can sit down and talk and not have sympathy for that person, but empathy. And just knowing where he's coming from. And if he says, do you understand where I'm coming from? I can say, I can understand where you're coming from. Yeah, but, you're going through your personal hurt and pain. It's like I went through mine. So that way I can identify with him. He can identify with me.
Tell me how you actually deal with the drug addicts on the reserve then. What sort of work do you actually do with them?
Mostly we tell them that they need to abstain totally from the use of any type of mind-altering chemical, and that being the drug of their choice. And we do an intake, and during the intake we can place them at a level that we think they're either abusive or addicted or dependent on it. Being abusive is that on the weekend maybe they'll do something and they won't stop, and then they'll quit. Now addicted is when they do it every day at a given time. They got to have it. And dependent on it is when you really come right down to them and saying you're dependent on it. You need to go to get help. And fortunately we have somebody who has gone to workshops and who is a professional counselor in the field of dealing with cocaine at this moment on a reservation. So we can take those people, other than referring them out to other organizations, other helping services, other alcohol units, so to speak, that deal with this. We can now at our treatment center called Partridge House, which is an inpatient. We only keep them for 8 weeks. That's the only problem. But during that time, we can give them a better understanding of what a chemical does to them, health-wise, and counsel them and their feelings, the emotions.
I also understand that you work shift for the local rescue squad. What exactly is this?
The rescue squad is a voluntary ambulance service on the reservation. We do not get any money for our services. We just provide a good medical care from a scene of an accident until we get them to the hospital. The ambulance services from the surrounding towns and neighborhoods was cut off to the reservations a few years ago. So we saw that we needed an ambulance service of our own. So a lot of concerned citizens got together, and a lot of people from the outside communities came to the reservation and instructed those on what they call emergency medical technician duties, and that's ambulance service, take vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, and do how to bandage certain type of wounds, how to do CPR, keep these people. Our main job is to keep these people alive till we get them to the hospital and keep them comfortable. That's all we can do.
What's the attitudes of the general public to the addicts? Are they regarded with a little bit of disdain or with sympathy?
It's like I said, community denial. And they'll deny that there's a problem in the neighborhood. But when they do see somebody that's they know is taking drugs, they more or less say, "Oh, poor guy," or "Poor lady." But that's about it. They should be taken off the roads or kept in jail. That's everybody thinks.
Angela, what's the situation, do you think, with community denial in the Sussex area? Do you find that we as a general public do deny that there is a problem with drugs?
Yeah, very similar to what Tronakwe says. In addition to that, I think it's quite sad, we need to do a big public education program, really. Most people, their knowledge about drugs and people who take drugs is purely gleaned from the media. I think quite often the media jump on the hysterical end of drug use. When you read things about drug users in the press, it's usually words are used like junkies, drug-crazed, addicts, etc. That's not necessarily so. I think we have to look at drugs in terms of, as chemicals, as Tronakwe said, alcohol is a drug, and we don't normally associate alcohol as being a purely deviant, people who use alcohol being purely a deviant act, where when we look at illegal drugs such as heroin and such, then immediately people tend to think of people who use heroin as people from another planet, people who are violent, dangerous, deviant, people who are going to maybe harm them. And that's not necessarily so. I think it's quite sad that people look at people who use illegal drugs in those terms.
Well, maybe we as a general public have an awful lot to learn about the drug situation. I know that you've learned an awful lot, Angela, from Tronakwe over the past couple of weeks. Thank you both very much indeed for coming on to the programme, letting me know what the type of work that you do. That was Angela Haynes, drug development worker for Hastings, and Tronakwe, who's come all the way over from a Mohawk Reserve in New York State. Now time for some music. Ricky, don't lose that number.
Tribes. Throughout the history of the New World, North American Indians have been moved and resettled, and many of their traditional homelands have been destroyed in the process. Indians are still fighting today to retain some of the land that they believe to be rightfully theirs, and they're taking the arguments outside the USA. One of the members of the Hopi tribe is visiting Sussex for the next 2 weeks, Thomas Banyaka Jr., and he'll be talking to school children about the Indian way of life. He's also taking part in a vigil in London to help publicise the fate of the Indians. Well, Thomas Banyaka joins me in the Sussex Scene studio today. I didn't give your name quite the right pronunciation. You tell us how to say it properly.
Well, the most correct way of saying it in Hopi is Bangakya, but the closest that most people come is Banyaka. So,
what sort of language do Hopi speak?
Well, it's always been Hopi, and it's classified in one of the divisions within the linguistics applications, but the way we view it is that it's always been a mother language to most tribes, and with all the confusion that has been coming up with regard to language, as long as we maintain just the idea that it is Hopi, we're fine.
Well, anyway, welcome to you, and it's about the Hopis particularly that you wanted to talk, but also about the fate of Red Indians in North America and the homelands. Now, do you have a homeland? You're a long way away now. Is there a particular piece of America that should be, or used to be, the Hopis?
Well, it has always been considered Hopi territory, and the first contact with the Europeans coming with the Franciscans and the Catholic Church, and with the Spanish government, areas designated as being occupied by Hopi were put under a designation of being that land base which the Hopi had always maintained. And
which area was this?
And this is in the Four Corners area of Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico in the southwestern United States.
Mm. What brings you here, though, to this country? I mentioned briefly that you're campaigning for the Hopis. Could you describe in a bit more detail what it is that you hope to achieve?
Well, the best that we can hope for is to begin relationships with people, as opposed to governments beginning, negotiations to do things. And the best method that we can try to understand is that, as people, everyone has a basis for understanding their feelings and home bases and problems that everyone can identify with, which are basically people problems. And as long as we can build our relationships with people, we can look toward working together toward common goals.
People problems, that's what you've got. You've got big problems. Just what are they exactly? What sort of situation, for example, is the Hopi homeland in at the moment? Is there an area which you want to get back? Is that the idea?
Well, partly getting back areas that the U.S. considers theirs, and the discussions and the legal questions over who is control is what we are trying to resolve.
And that's what you'd like to explain outside the USA. You think other people will understand. If we go back a bit, or if we go back quite a long way to the 19th century, that's when the serious problems started. You'd had problems back in the 16th century. The tribe obviously goes back a long way. But in the 19th century, that's when a lot of the land was taken away and a lot of problems began for the Hopis.
And it was based on the idea of, it was a religious stance where different countries came in designating Indians as savages, and in giving themselves the idea of being Christian-type governments, would not allow any land that was here on this earth to be designated as a savage land. They'd always had to become a Christian territory. And given that the Indians were considered savages, were not allowed that right to occupy or to use land.
So the Bureau of Indian Affairs was set up, and agents came along to evict basically the Hopis. The Hopis were quite peaceful. They sort of went in for passive resistance. But it was other people, the Navajo Indians, who caused problems in a way for you. Going back that far.
Well, the Hopi have been in their same situation for maybe 10,000 years in the same spot. And various tribes have always migrated through and stayed and moved on. But with Hopi, we've always maintained the same land base. But with the in the last 200 years, since the United States became, in their minds, a country, they designated that certain areas were to be reserved for Indians. And in their manner of speaking, they were for all Indians rather than being for specific ones, which became the problem. And now we have approximately 4 different tribes, in a quarrel over the same land base. And the Hopi, being there the longest, have the most say, but they cannot get the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the U.S. federal government to understand that they have a say-so in how things are developed also.
Well, there's obviously been a lot of changes in the last 100 years in the way the Americans have felt towards North American Indians, and there have been various rulings. But what's the situation now? Can you tell us how the Hopis live now, for example? Are there people who still very much like you regard themselves as Hopi Indians and would like to be back on the proper homeland?
Well, I think everyone that considers themselves Hopi does live out in their own homelands. I grew up till the age of 15 without electricity or using any type of, say, modern technology to do anything. And it's just been within the last maybe 20 years that a lot of development has come out there and has, impacted on the Hopi. But they still maintain their own ceremonial cycle. Our calendar year is divided into 7, as opposed to yours being 12 months, and our whole cycle is still based on that, and it's still very much alive.
And you follow a very particular philosophy. You believe you play actually a key role in the survival of the human race.
I think it's not so much that the Hopi themselves play a key role as much as they understand that if people retain their spirituality as the basis for their existence, then many of the problems, which are economic or political, will not have that much effect. And until people begin mixing the politics with religion or, become involved with the separation of church and state, then, our problems begin.
Do you think there should be, everyone should have a more spiritual dimension to their life?
I think it's necessary for, the survival, peoples that they regain a sense of balance between their spiritual self and, the economic pressures that are put on by, various peoples, governments, or,
How many Hopis are there?
Well, there's approximately 10 to 12,000 at the moment, and they were never considered, or they never considered themselves to grow to be a large tribe if they maintained their spiritual well-being. And in the ceremonial practices, celibacy, salt-free, meat-free diets are used, and the ceremonies run anywhere from 4 days to 16 days. And if one was to continue those practices on a scheduled, maintenance system, it does not allow for a lot of expansion in populations.
But would then the Hopis, if that was to go on like that, and it was to go on in a specific homeland area, would the Hopis live in isolation from the rest of America? Would they like to live in harmony in some way? How would they combine with other Americans?
Well, the thing is that I think everyone has the idea of the melting pot being the most or the best way for peoples to, get together and to do things. But understanding Hopi and their basis for remaining Hopi and being separate but still part of the human race is, I think, the intent that, a lot of people should look toward doing, rather than becoming, one of everything. People lose their identity and individualities by, assuming that that's correct, and the basis for the Hopi retaining its own is to ensure its own identity, its own culture, and they do not go out and practice a missionary type of zeal to convert people to whatever Hopi is, because it is not a religion per se, it's more a way of life.
You said you followed that way of life and you were part of a Hopi family and tribe in quite an isolated way till you were about 15. What happened then?
I became educated, and after becoming educated, a lot of things changed. And it took a few years of going off into the Western civilization to be able to see back and understand the values that I had been raised by and see how I could apply those.
But are there quite a few people now who haven't done that, who've still remained within the Hopi way of life, and is that what you want to help them continue?
This is building avenues for people to go back or to retain what they have, and provide methods for coexisting and building bridges between two cultures.
You're here in Sussex to talk to school children, and tonight you're giving a talk at the University of Sussex. Why Sussex in particular? You've mentioned generally that you think it's a good idea that other people understand the problems of the Hopi tribe outside the USA, but is it going to help in a practical way at all?
I think it does not really matter where one begins to build relationships with people, but I think that given different areas, everyone has different concerns and different backgrounds, and the more varied the background for building relationships, the better understandings will be.
There's also going to be a prayer vigil outside the U.S. Embassy. Now, is that just to make people aware of the connection between the U.S. action and the plight of the Red Indians?
That's partially part of the understandings or the basis for a prayer vigil. The other thing is to make people aware that, or to make the U.S. government understand that there is a concern not only for themselves but for other peoples, and that everyone, if done in a atmosphere where spirituality becomes the common ground for helping each other, that can become the basis for doing interactions.
Have you had a good response so far in this country?
I have had a good response in a lot of different ways. I feel very comfortable here. The foods are fine, and the ale is also fine. So I think we do not have much problem in beginning to be able to work out our differences.
Well, thank you very much for coming in today, Thomas. And if people would like to hear you talking, they should go this evening or this afternoon rather, at 4:30 to Sussex University, where you'll be the Civics Building, which is next to the Meeting House at the University of Sussex. That's at Falmer, just outside Brighton, and it starts at 4:30. And Michael Seeley in Hastings has much more information than we can give right now on American Indians, and he can be contacted on Hastings 424442, because, of course, from Hastings there was, if I remember rightly, Grey Owl, who was a Sussex man who went over and lived the life of a Red Indian, became very involved in the environment. But that's another story for another day. Meanwhile, Thomas Manyanka, thank you for coming into Sussex Scene.
They fought a long battle at home and abroad to keep their homelands and their traditional way of life, but in the next few months they expect they will be forced out. Mr. Banyakir is with me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Why does it matter so much to you that you be moved from this particular area of land?
I think at this moment the interest has come about from governmental, from state, and from mining interests that have long understood that to be rich in minerals.
That's why they want you out. Why do you so particularly want to stay there?
With the basis of having lived there for centuries and having occupied and maintained a land base as a source of their lifestyle, this is what they wish to continue to be able to provide for and to care for future and present generations.
How do you mean, maintain a lifestyle? In what sense?
To be able to enjoy the privileges of decision-making process, much like you do here in regard to how you wish to maintain, say, the UK or an empire.
But I mean, you don't still go around wearing feathers in your head, for instance, do you? I mean, you have adapted in so many ways to the 20th century.
Yes, we have always moved along and continue to be and to provide and encourage younger students and peoples to be able to understand and also participate in a world community.
So why, again, let me come back to the question, why does this particular area matter to you so much? Is there some sacred significance to it, or what?
We have always maintained a land as being the source of life, and if land is the source of life, then we must also provide it with our prayers and use our shrines as the basis for maintaining that existence.
So you do have shrines in this area. It's called what? The Big Mountain?
This has always been regarded as Hopi territory for the past centuries and will always continue to remain as such.
The authorities say that one of the reasons for moving you is that there is a dispute between yourselves and the Navajo Indians. Is there anything in that?
These are the dispute, and the ideas of problems are fabricated to be able to create disputes so that they have to look for an outside source to be able to settle those disputes.
Many of the Hopi Indians have, and the Navajo for that matter, have in fact moved. They've been offered compensation by the government, they've been offered houses. Some people might say that they've been treated very fairly.
The idea of being able to receive compensation for voluntary acts has always been a privilege that Indians have enjoyed. The idea is also, the main idea is that the land base is to be secured, and that for those people who wish to remain, that is the concern.
But what does happen to your people when they're moved out of these lands, when they move into the cities, into urban areas?
They are placed under undue stresses in a system that they do not understand, they do not wish to join, and which has forced itself on them in many ways.
And yet, if you go into an Indian territory, I've been many times, you see lots of pickup trucks, you see colour televisions, you see all the trappings of 20th century Western society.
It has always been understood that you can have what you create and you can receive the benefits of your own initiatives. And as long as you do not sell, you do not injure other people in acquiring whatever it is that you wish, this is your freedom and this is for you to enjoy.
But you're quite determined to stay on this land?
It has always been regarded as Hopi territory and will always remain so.
Mr. Banikia, thank you.
Thank you.